The air was thick with the scent of 1,000 white roses and the warm, waxy perfume of candlelight. It was a scene plucked from a fairy tale, all shimmering crystal and the soft, melancholic sway of a jazz band. But for me, sitting at that table in the middle of the ballroom, it felt less like a dream and more like a beautifully staged play where I was an unwilling extra, my heart a frantic, trapped bird against my ribs. My chair was positioned right next to my grandson, Leo. Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. At 7 years old, he was the absolute center of my universe, the beating heart of my world outside of my own chest. And right now, that little heart was clearly troubled. He was hunched over the immaculate white tablecloth, his small hands pushing a bright red toy car back and forth, back and forth. Vroom. Vroom. The soft whisper was a stark contrast to the roar of adult laughter and the clinking of wine glasses around us. "Look at him, Betty," an elderly woman from our table said, her kind eyes crinkling. "He's getting so big. How old is he now?" I tore my gaze away from Leo and offered a practiced, soft smile. "He just turned 7. Time. It just flies, doesn't it?" My voice was calm, but inside, a familiar ache throbbed. Time had flown, yes, straight through a storm that had left our family battered and forever changed. I turned back to Leo, my heart softening into a puddle of pure, unconditional love. I reached over and carefully straightened the tiny bow tie at his neck. The silk was cool beneath my fingers, and the gesture felt like more than just fixing a child's clothes. It felt like I was caressing a memory, the memory of his mother, my first daughter-in-law, Maria. Her tender smile, the way she would fuss over Leo's outfits with so much love, it was all as vivid as if it were yesterday. My eyes lifted, searching the crowd for my son Alex. There he was, moving between the tables in his elegant navy blue suit, a crystal flute of champagne in his hand. He was radiant, smiling, clapping shoulders, and toasting guests. He looked every bit the happy groom. But a mother's eyes see more than a smile. I saw the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his laughter didn't quite reach his eyes. It was a brilliant performance, a desperate attempt to hide the cavernous emptiness I knew still lived inside him, the void Maria had left behind. And then there was the bride. Ava stood in the distance, a vision in a beaded wedding dress that caught the candlelight and threw it back in 1,000 dazzling sparks. She was surrounded by a flock of friends, posing for pictures, her head thrown back in a perfect, cloudless laugh. It was a laugh that said she owned this room, this day, this man, and maybe she did. But every time I looked at her, I felt a strange, cold sensation trickle down my spine, a weird unease I couldn't quite name. I told myself I was just an old woman, overly sensitive, protective of the shattered pieces of my son's heart. The waiters moved through the room like graceful ghosts, refilling glasses, clearing empty plates. I focused on Leo, cutting a small piece of the vanilla wedding cake and placing it on a plate for him. "Here you go, my love," I said softly. He looked up, his clear blue eyes, Maria's eyes, shining with a flicker of gratitude. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that distant, preoccupied look. He lowered his head again, his small fingers finding the red car once more. Vroom, vroom. It was his sanctuary, that toy, a tiny, mobile world where he felt safe. And then everything stopped. Leo's hands froze. The car was motionless on the tablecloth. His head lifted, and his round, serious eyes locked onto mine. The look in them was so intense, so unchildlike, that a jolt of pure, cold fear shot through me. His little hand darted out and grabbed mine. His fingers were like ice. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice tight and urgent, "I want to leave, right now." My own heart stuttered in my chest. I leaned into him, my body curving protectively over his, and placed a hand on his small, stiff shoulder. "What's wrong, my boy?" I asked, keeping my voice low and steady, a stark contrast to the sudden drumbeat of panic in my veins. "Tell me what it is." Leo shuddered, his little lips pressing together into a thin, white line. He looked terrified. He leaned in so close I could feel his warm, quick breath on my cheek. His next words were so soft they were almost swallowed by the music. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice trembling with a fear he couldn't contain. "You didn't look under the table, did you?" The words landed not like a question, but like a physical blow. A cold knife of dread slid straight through my ribs and into my heart. A terrible, suffocating anguish began to bloom inside me, making the air feel thin and useless. I tried to stay calm. I forced a smile and stroked his soft hair. "It's okay, my love, it's okay. Let your grandma look." But his gaze, the sheer, unadulterated panic in the eyes of my 7-year-old grandson, held me captive. I couldn't ignore this. I couldn't dismiss it. Slowly, deliberately, I bent down. The world around me, the laughter, the music, the clinking glasses faded into a dull, muffled roar. My entire universe narrowed to the space beneath this white tablecloth. I lifted the heavy, linen hem. The space under the table was a pool of shadows, a dark cave framed by the wooden legs of chairs and the gentle swing of Leo's little polished shoes. My eyes, adjusted to the bright ballroom, took a moment to see. And then I saw it. A small, square piece of paper folded neatly into fourths. It was lying there, innocuous, almost invisible in the gloom, right next to the leg of Leo's chair. It looked so harmless, but its very presence there felt like a threat. It chilled my blood. Leo pressed his small body against my side, his hand gripping my arm like a vice. I could feel the frantic, bird-like flutter of his pulse through his tiny fingers. Every tremble that ran through him was a silent scream, telling me that something was profoundly, horribly wrong. Without a second thought, I crouched down lower, my knees protesting. I reached a trembling hand into the darkness, my fingers closing around the cold, smooth paper. The people around us were still laughing, toasting, completely unaware that my world was tilting on its axis. In that instant, my life had shrunk to just 3 things: me, my terrified grandson, and this damned piece of paper in my hand. I pulled it out from under the tablecloth and straightened up, the paper feeling like a lead weight in my palm. Leo watched me, his eyes wide and pleading. The candle flame at the center of our table flickered, casting just enough of a dancing, golden light. My hands shook as I carefully, slowly, unfolded the note. The handwriting was a rushed, slanted scribble, but the words were stark and horrifyingly clear. Table 8. Add shrimp to the child's serving. A few words. Just a simple, brutal sentence. But it was a sentence that stole the air from my lungs. I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped animal. Leo is severely, deathly allergic to shrimp. It's something my entire family, every single relative and friend, knows. It's a fact etched into our minds after a terrifying close call when he was a toddler. A single piece of shrimp, a mere trace of it, could close his throat, send his body into shock. It could kill him. Who? The question screamed in my mind, silent and desperate. Who could have written this? Who could be so calculating, so monstrously cruel on my son's wedding day? My fingers tightened around Leo's hand, feeling the fine bones and the cold terror in his grip. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. I didn't care about the surprised looks from the elderly couple nearby, who stopped their conversation to stare at me with concern. I pulled Leo into my arms, hugging him with all my strength, crushing him against my body as if I could physically shield him from the evil that had just been revealed. I held him like I was afraid he would be snatched away from me, like he might vanish into thin air. The jazz band played on. The guests laughed and chatted. The candlelight continued to gleam off the silver and the crystal, but for me, Betty Williams, grandmother, mother, protector, the beautiful, sparkling wedding had just ended. In its place was a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the pounding of my own terrified heart and the ghostly echo of those few, deadly words on a scrap of paper. The performance was over. The real drama was just beginning. For a long, suspended moment, I was utterly paralyzed, standing there in the middle of all that glittering joy, holding my grandson as if he were the only real thing in a world made of painted glass. The note was a crumpled, burning secret in my clenched fist. The words, "Add shrimp to the child's serving," were seared onto the back of my eyelids, flashing like a neon warning sign every time I blinked. Leo's small body was rigid against mine. He wasn't crying. He was too terrified for tears. He was just waiting for me, his grandma, to make the bad thing go away. And in that silence, a memory, sharp and vivid as broken crystal, sliced through the panic. It was a memory of another night, years ago, a night steeped in a different, more familiar kind of fear. Leo was just 3, a little ball of energy with a head of wild curls. He'd been at a friend's birthday party, and Maria had brought him home, his face smeared with chocolate, laughing. But within an hour, the laughter had stopped. He'd started scratching at his neck, his breathing becoming a thin, wheezing whistle. A hive's rash bloomed across his chest, angry and red. "Mom, Betty." Maria's voice had been a blade of pure panic, slicing through the quiet of their suburban home. His breath. "I can't. Something's wrong." I'd rushed over, my own heart in my throat. By the time I got there, Leo's lips were tinged with blue. Maria was clutching him, her face as white as the sheets on his bed, tears streaming down her cheeks silently. "I'm so scared," she'd whispered, her voice trembling so badly I could barely understand her. "He ate a shrimp puff. They said they didn't have any, but he must have gotten one. We didn't wait for an ambulance." I drove, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, while Maria sat in the back, holding an epinephrine pen the doctor had prescribed for just this scenario, praying we wouldn't have to use it. She held Leo, rocking him, whispering, "Breathe, my love, just breathe for Mommy." In the rearview mirror, I saw her, not as my daughter-in-law, but as a fellow soldier in the trench of motherhood, fighting for her child's life. We spent the night in the emergency room, taking turns holding cool cloths to his forehead, watching the monitors until the steady beep, beep, beep of his heart became the most beautiful sound in the world. When the sun finally rose, pale and hopeful through the hospital window, Leo's fever had broken, and the swelling had gone down. He lay sleeping, exhausted, in his mother's arms. Maria looked up at me, her eyes red raw and shadowed, but with a faint, miraculous smile. "Thank you, Mom," she'd said, her voice hoarse. "I don't know what I would have done without you." I'd just taken her hand and squeezed it, a silent promise. A promise that I would always be there. For her, for him. That promise echoed in my head now. A ghost from a happier, whole family. A family that was shattered. Maria was gone. And now, someone was trying to take Leo, too. The memory snapped back into the present with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. Someone had known about his allergy and had written a note to ensure he was served the one thing that could kill him. The ice in my veins turned to fire. A red-hot, primal rage began to burn through the shock. I looked down at Leo, at his trusting, terrified eyes, and I knew I could not, would not, fail him. "Lucy," I said, my voice a low, strained command. My adopted daughter was sitting on the other side of Leo, her beige dress looking simple and pure amidst the opulence. She had been watching us, her brow furrowed with concern. Now, she saw the look on my face, the paper in my hand, the way I held Leo. "Betty, what is it?" she asked, her voice instantly laced with the same protective instinct I felt. "Take care of Leo, please," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though a tremor of pure fury ran through it. I gently pried Leo's arms from around my waist and guided him toward Lucy. He went willingly, clinging to her instead, burying his face in her shoulder. Lucy's arms closed around him, a fortress. "Where are you going?" she asked, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. I didn't answer. I didn't have an answer. I just knew I had to move. I had to find out who had done this, now. I turned and walked away from table 8, my legs feeling heavy and alien, as if I were wading through deep water. Each step was an effort, but my heart was a frantic drum, urging me forward, faster. The laughter and music from the ballroom seemed to mock me, a soundtrack to a nightmare. I pushed through a set of large wooden doors and entered the quieter, cooler hallway that led to the kitchens. The air changed. The scent of roses was replaced by the smell of disinfectant and roasted meat. Near a service bar, a group of waiters were gathered, laughing and chatting, taking a momentary break from the demands of the reception. Their ease, their normalcy, felt like a personal insult. My eyes scanned them and landed on a young man with a kind, open face. David. He was the one who had served our table several times throughout the evening, always with a polite smile. He had carefully placed the plate of fresh, pink shrimp on our table. He had seen Leo. I walked straight up to him, my gaze locked on his. The other waiters fell silent, sensing the storm that had just entered their midst. "You," I said, my voice low and tight. I thrust the crumpled note out, holding it right in front of his face. "Do you know who sent this paper?" David's smile vanished. His eyes dropped to the note, and his face underwent a terrifying transformation. The carefree young man was gone, replaced by someone pale and panicked. His jaw went slack. "My God," he stammered, his hands coming up slightly trembling. That's my paper. I must have dropped it." The confirmation was like a key turning in a lock. A woman gave it to me. He rushed on, his words tumbling over each other. She stopped me, said it was an instruction for the chef. I was carrying a full tray. It must have fallen from my pocket when I was serving your table. Rage, hot and blinding, exploded behind my eyes. "Who gave it to you?" I insisted, my voice rising, sharp enough to make him flinch. My composure, the careful calm I had cultivated for decades, was shattering. "What woman?" David took a step back, shaking his head, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. "I don't know her name, ma'am. I swear, she was just a guest. She just told me to give it to the chef. The paper didn't say who sent it." All the more reason to be suspicious. I shot back, taking a step closer. The other waiters were staring, their whispers now a nervous hum. "You know my grandson is severely allergic to shrimp? Did you know that? A single piece could kill him. Did you even think to question a secret note about a child's food?" David turned a sickly shade of gray. The horror in his eyes seemed genuine. "Ma'am, I really didn't know. I follow instructions. I had no idea. I would never. I have a little brother." His voice broke, and he looked like he might be sick. He was just a kid, a scared kid caught in a web he didn't understand. The heat of my anger subsided, replaced by a colder, more chilling realization. He was a pawn, a delivery boy. The real monster was the one who had written the note. The one who had handed it to him with a smile. From inside the ballroom, the band finished a number, and the master of ceremonies' voice boomed cheerfully through the speakers. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd all like to take your seats, we'll be serving the main course shortly. His voice was a cattle prod. Time was up. The main course was coming. Leo's plate, if I didn't stop it, would be carried out from the kitchen, specially prepared with a deadly ingredient, a trap served on fine china. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to force the trembling in my hands to stop. I looked at David's pale, terrified face, and then down at the note in my hand. It was no longer just a piece of paper. It was a weapon. It was evidence. I knew what I had to do. The time for quiet investigation was over. The danger was too immediate, too vile. I couldn't protect Leo by whispering in hallways. I had to expose this. I had to tear the beautiful false facade off this wedding and show everyone the rot festering beneath. I turned away from the group of stunned waiters without another word. My heels clicked decisively on the marble floor as I walked back toward the ballroom doors. The paper felt like it was burning a brand into my palm. I pushed the doors open. The scene inside was exactly as I had left it. Candlelight, music, laughter. The waiters were beginning to move in a synchronized wave, carrying silver domes toward the tables. My eyes went straight to table 8. Leo was still huddled with Lucy, his small face peeking over her shoulder, his eyes, those beautiful, scared eyes, locked on me. They were full of a silent plea, a question. "Did you fix it, Grandma?" Lucy met my gaze. She saw the resolve on my face, the grim set of my jaw. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was all the confirmation I needed. I walked back to our table. I didn't sit down. I stood behind my chair, my hand resting on its carved wooden back. I could feel the eyes of the elderly couple on me, curious and concerned. I saw Alex, my son, laughing at something a cousin had said, his face still glowing with his wedding day joy. He was so blind. So heartbreakingly blind. I took Leo's small, cold hand in mine. His trembling fingers curled around my palm, trusting me completely. And then, as if an invisible force lifted me, I stood up straight, my spine rigid. I didn't shout. I didn't scream. But my voice, when it came out, was clear, firm, and sharp as broken glass, cutting through the melody of the jazz band and the murmur of 100 conversations. "One moment, please," I announced, my voice resonating through the vast room. "Before we begin to eat, I have something that must be clarified. Right now." The effect was instantaneous. The music faltered and died. The clinking of glasses ceased. The laughter stuttered into silence. Every single head in the ballroom turned. Every eye was fixed on me, the grandmother standing defiantly at table 8, holding her grandson's hand, a crumpled piece of paper in the other. In the dead quiet, you could have heard a rose petal drop. The world had stopped. And I was about to set it spinning in a whole new, terrifying direction. The silence that followed my voice was the heaviest, most profound sound I had ever heard. It was a physical weight, pressing down on the ballroom, smothering the last echoes of music and laughter. 100 faces were frozen, turned toward me like pale, startled moons, their expressions a tapestry of confusion, curiosity, and mild irritation. The musicians lowered their instruments, their cheerful tunes dead in the air. The only sound was the frantic, hammering beat of my own heart, a wild drum against my ribs that I was sure everyone could hear. I held the note aloft, my hand trembling, but my arm was steady. The small white square of paper felt as weighty and significant as a judge's gavel. "Who wrote this?" My voice, though strained with a tempest of emotions, cut through the quiet with shocking clarity. Who wrote this note asking for shrimp to be added to the food of the child at table 8? A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd, a sibilant hiss that grew from a murmur to a confused roar. Heads turned, not toward me anymore, but toward each other. Shrugs were exchanged. Baffled glances. What is she talking about? What note? I felt Leo's small hand squeeze mine, a desperate, silent plea. I looked down and saw his face, pale and terrified, pressed against my side. His trust was a weight and a weapon. It gave me the strength I didn't know I had. From across the room, I saw my son, Alex. He had been smiling, clinking glasses with a colleague. Now, his smile was gone, replaced by a look of bewildered alarm. He started moving toward us, weaving through the frozen tables, his brow deeply furrowed. "Mom?" he called out, his voice tight with concern. "What's going on? What is this?" He reached our table, his gaze darting from my face to Leo's, searching for a logical explanation, a simple misunderstanding. The perfect picture of his wedding day was cracking, and he was desperately trying to hold it together. I didn't answer him with words. Instead, I placed the crumpled note on the pristine white tablecloth and slid it toward him. My hand was shaking so badly the paper seemed to dance. "Read it yourself," I said, my voice low and harsh, a stranger's voice even to my own ears. Alex picked up the note, his movements slow, confused. His eyes scanned the scribbled words. I watched his face. I saw the exact moment the meaning. Registered. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving them a sickly gray. His hands, which had just been steady while holding a champagne flute, began to tremble slightly. "What? What does this mean?" he stammered, his voice hollow. He looked from me to Leo, his eyes begging for this to be a mistake, a bad joke. This can't be. Who would? And then she was there, a vision in white, gliding through the stunned guests. Ava. Her beaded wedding dress caught the light, a cruel parody of innocence. A perfectly sculpted frown of concern was etched on her beautiful face. "What is all this?" she asked, her voice a soft, melodic counterpoint to the tension. She placed a possessive hand on Alex's arm. "Some kind of bad joke. You're causing a scene, Betty." Her use of my first name, without the respectful Mrs. Williams, was a subtle jab, a reminder that she was family now. I looked directly into her eyes, my heart a clenched fist of anger and fear. "My grandson is deathly allergic to shrimp," I stated, my voice trembling with the effort to keep it level. "This is not a joke. This is an attempt at murder." The word murder landed in the silent room like a bomb. Gasps echoed from various tables. A woman dropped her clutch, the sound startlingly loud. The whispers became louder, more agitated. "Murder? Did she say murder?" Ava's reaction was a masterclass in feigned shock. She brought a hand to her chest, her eyes widening in perfectly calibrated horror. But I saw it. I saw the flicker of something else deep within them, a flash of pure, undiluted panic before the mask of wounded innocence snapped back into place. She let out a short, forced laugh, a brittle sound that grated on the heavy air. "Excuse me, but there is no name on that paper." Her tone was now laced with a mocking sweetness, a deliberate attempt to paint me as the villain, a paranoid, hysterical old woman. "Are you going to believe a story made up by a child who found a scrap of paper? Children have such wild imaginations." She was trying to shift the blame, to make Leo the liar, to make me the fool. The effect on the crowd was immediate. Doubt began to creep into their murmurs. I saw heads nodding. Maybe she's right. The boy is shy. Maybe he's seeking attention. Betty has always been so protective. Maybe she's overreacting on such an emotional day. The blood boiled in my veins. Her audacity, her cold-blooded manipulation, left me momentarily speechless. I wanted to scream. I wanted to lunge across the table and tear the pearls from her neck. How dare she? How dare she call my grandson a liar? How dare she stand there in her wedding dress, the architect of this evil plot, and play the victim? I felt the battle slipping away. The tide of opinion was turning, swayed by her performance. Alex was trapped in the middle, his gaze torn between his new wife's plausible denials and his mother's raw, desperate accusation. And then a new voice cut through the tension, cold and sharp as an icicle. "That's enough, Ava." It was Lucy. She had been silent until now, a solid, comforting presence for Leo. But she stood up, her simple beige dress a stark contrast to Ava's dazzling gown. She gently guided Leo behind her, placing her own body as a shield between him and the woman who wanted him dead. Her eyes, usually so warm and gentle, were now hard and reined, fixed on Ava with an intensity that was terrifying. The entire ballroom watched, breathless, as Lucy took 2 steps forward. The air crackled with anticipation. "The only wicked person here is you," Lucy said, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. It was trembling, but not with fear. It was trembling with a rage she had held back for months. "You wanted to harm an innocent child. At your own wedding." Ava's mask slipped another inch. A flicker of genuine anger crossed her features. "You shut up," she hissed, her voice losing its melodic quality, becoming sharp and venomous. "You're just a jealous intruder. You've always wanted what was mine." It was the wrong thing to say. It was the truth, but not in the way she meant. Lucy didn't flinch. She didn't back down. She stood her ground, a pillar of righteous fury. "How dare you call me jealous?" Her voice was icy now, controlled. "Look this child in the eyes," she commanded, pointing to Leo, who was peeking out from behind her, his face a mask of terror. "Look at him and tell me you didn't try to hurt him." The challenge hung in the air. All eyes turned to Ava. The perfect bride was cornered. And then it happened. Lucy, pushed beyond all endurance by Ava's venomous accusation and the threat to the boy she loved as her own, stepped forward and slapped her. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent ballroom. A sharp, dry, resounding crack that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Everyone froze. Me, the guests, Alex, time itself seemed to stop. Ava staggered back a step, her hand flying to her cheek, where a red, hand-shaped mark was already blooming against her pale skin. Her eyes were wide with genuine, unfeigned shock. For a single, breathtaking second, there was no mask. There was only raw, stunned pain and a dawning, cataclysmic fury. Then the performance resumed. She turned to Alex, her lower lip trembling, fat tears welling in her eyes and spilling over with practiced perfection. She let out a choked sob. "You see?" she cried, her voice breaking with a convincingly ragged edge. "She's crazy. She's always been jealous of me, and now she's attacking me. What have I done to deserve this on my wedding day?" She buried her face in Alex's shoulder, her body shaking with theatrical sobs. The ballroom erupted into chaos. The spell of silence was broken. Voices rose in a confused clamor. Some guests looked at Lucy with shock and disapproval. Others looked at Ava with suspicion. Alex was a statue of confusion and distress, holding his weeping bride, his world collapsing around him in a way he still couldn't comprehend. "Lucy, for God's sake, calm down," he pleaded, his voice ragged. But Lucy didn't back down. She stood there, her chest heaving, the hand that had delivered the slap clenched at her side. Her gaze never left Ava. The line had been drawn. The battle for the soul of our family was no longer a quiet, secret war. It was out in the open, violent and brutal, and it was far from over. The slap was just the beginning. The truth was still hiding in the shadows, and I knew, with a chilling certainty that we had to drag it, kicking and screaming, into the light. The slap's echo seemed to hang in the air long after the sound had faded, a ghost of violence that had shattered the wedding's beautiful illusion. The ballroom was a cacophony of gasps, outraged murmurs, and confused shouts. But for me, in the eye of this hurricane, the noise faded into a dull roar. All I could see was Ava, sobbing into Alex's chest, and Lucy, standing her ground, a warrior trembling with spent adrenaline. And Alex, my son, his face was a tortured map of confusion. He was holding his new wife, but his eyes were on Lucy, on me, on Leo, searching, desperately searching, for an anchor in this sudden, violent storm. "She's insane with jealousy," Ava wailed, her voice muffled against Alex's jacket. "She's always wanted you, and she's using this piece of paper to ruin us." Her words were a poison, expertly delivered, and I saw them hit their mark in the eyes of some guests. But they also broke the paralysis that had gripped me. The fury that had been burning cold within me now ignited into a white-hot flame. I would not let her twist this. I would not let her paint Lucy as the villain and herself as the victim. I slammed my open hand down on the table. The glasses jumped, clinking together in a frantic, startled chorus. The sound cut through the chaos like a gunshot, silencing the room once more. "That's enough." My voice was not the gentle tone of a grandmother, nor the strained plea of a moment before. It was a cold, commanding shout that brooked no argument. It was the voice of a mother whose child was in danger. All eyes snapped back to me. I turned, my gaze sweeping the room until I found him, cowering near the service entrance. "David," I barked. "Come here, now." The young waiter, pale as the tablecloth, looked like a deer caught in oncoming headlights. He hesitated, but the pressure of 100 staring eyes forced him forward. He shuffled toward our table, his shoulders hunched, unable to meet anyone's gaze. I held up the note, my hand now steady as stone. "Confirm it. Is this the paper you received? The one you dropped under my grandson's chair?" David's eyes darted from the paper to my face, to Ava, then back to the floor. He nodded, a frantic, jerky motion. "Yes, ma'am, it is. A woman from the other table gave it to me. I was carrying a tray. I must have dropped it. I'm so sorry, I didn't know." Ava hurried to interrupt, her voice sharp and desperate, cutting through his stammering. "You're mistaken. He's confused. I don't know anything about that note." She was clinging to Alex, her tears now looking more like panic than sorrow. But before I could counter, a new sound emerged from the crowd. A soft, broken sob. From a table near the front, a young woman stood up. She was barely more than a girl, 18 at most, her face streaked with tears. It was Gloria, Ava's younger sister. Her hands were clutched together, wringing a napkin into a tight knot. It was me," she whispered, her voice trembling so badly it was almost inaudible. But in the dead silence, every word carried. "Ava gave me the paper. She asked me to give it to the waiter. She told me it was a last-minute change to the menu for a guest." She broke down, her body shaking with ragged sobs. "I swear, I didn't know what was inside. I didn't know." A collective, sharp gasp sucked the air out of the ballroom. My God, I can't believe it. Her own sister. This was the dagger. This was the truth, spoken not by an enemy, but by family. Ava whirled on her sister, her face disfigured by a rage so pure it was almost frightening. The loving bride was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. "Shut up, Gloria," she screamed, her voice stripping away the last vestiges of her cultured charm. "How dare you? How dare you make up these lies to hurt your own sister?" Gloria flinched as if struck, shrinking back into her chair. I'm not lying, she cried out, her voice gaining strength through her tears. I just did what you asked me to. You told me it was important. The threads of Ava's deception were unraveling at lightning speed. The whispers in the room were no longer of doubt, but of dawning horror and disgust. An older uncle, Mr. Johnson, stood up, his face a thundercloud of revulsion. It's unbelievable, he boomed, his voice shaking with indignation. Such wickedness! On a day of celebration, to not even spare an innocent child. In the midst of the chaos, Lucy spoke again. She was calm now, her voice an icy, clear stream cutting through the muddy turmoil. If you keep denying it, Ava, we can ask to check the security cameras in the ballroom. She gestured to the small, dark domes in the corners of the ceiling. I'm sure they captured who gave the note to Gloria, or to the waiter. Everything will be cleared up in a moment. That was the final blow, the checkmate. Lucy's words were a stone thrown into a stagnant pond, and the ripples were panic on Ava's face. All the color drained from her skin, leaving her ashen. Her lips, once curved in a perfect smile, were pressed into a bloodless line. Her eyes darted around the room, desperately seeking an escape, a lie, anything. But there was nothing. The walls of her deception had crumbled, and she was left exposed in the rubble. She didn't say another word. That silence, that utter, defeated silence, was the clearest confession of all. And in that silence, Alex finally broke. He had been still, a statue of shock, holding the woman who had just been exposed as a monster. Now, he slowly pushed her away. His hands dropped from her arms as if she were made of hot coal. He took a stumbling step back, his eyes wide with a horror so profound it seemed to physically pain him. He looked at Ava, really looked at her, and I saw the last vestige of his love for her shrivel and die in his gaze. Ava! His voice was a broken whisper, a ragged tear in the fabric of the room. Tell me the truth. Is it true? He was begging, one last time, for a miracle, for this to be some terrible dream. Ava looked up at him. She tried to force a smile, a twisted, pathetic imitation of her former charm. You don't believe them, do you? She pleaded, her voice brittle. It's all their plan. I didn't do anything. But her words were empty, hollow. The performance was over. The audience had seen behind the curtain. Lucy, her own heartbreak for Alex evident in her glistening eyes, put a gentle hand on his shoulder. Leo, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Leo almost died because of this woman. It was the simple, devastating truth spoken aloud. Something in Alex snapped. The confusion, the hurt, the guilt, it coalesced into a roar of pure, unadulterated anguish. Leo is my son, he cried out, his voice breaking, tears finally streaming down his face unchecked. He pointed a trembling finger at Ava. You tried to kill my son, at our own wedding. His words were a final, brutal verdict. They hung in the air, stark and undeniable. Ava didn't cry. She didn't plead. She just stood there, her face a cold, hard mask of defeat and fury. Those weren't tears of repentance in her eyes. They were tears of rage at being caught. I placed the note on the table, the evidence that had brought down a kingdom. I looked at Ava, and then at the assembled guests, my family, my friends. Anyone, I declared, my voice firm and unyielding, resonating with a finality that echoed to the rafters. Anyone who tries to harm my grandson will never, ever have the right to set foot in this family again. It was a sentence, a banishment. As if on cue, 2 hotel security personnel, who had been summoned during the commotion, approached. They were large, imposing figures in dark suits. Ma'am, one of them said to Ava, his voice polite but devoid of all warmth. Please come with us. Ava looked around, A final, desperate scan of the room, searching for a single ally. She found none. Only looks of contempt, of horror, of pity. The guests were a sea of averted eyes and shaken heads. The whispers now were clear. Unbelievable. How could someone be so cruel? She was utterly, completely alone. She backed away from the security guards, a trapped animal with nowhere to run. Then, with a sound that was half sob, half snarl of fury, she turned and allowed herself to be escorted away. The dazzling bride, the center of attention, was led out of the ballroom not on a wave of applause, but into a void of silence and shame. The heavy doors swung shut behind her, and she was gone. The silence she left in her wake was heavier than any that had come before. It was the silence of a dream shattered, of a future erased. Alex stood motionless for a long moment, his hands clenched in his hair, his shoulders shaking. Then, as if the last of his strength had evaporated, he slowly crumpled. He knelt on the floor in front of Leo, his body racked with sobs. He reached out a trembling hand and touched his son's cheek. "Son," he choked out, his voice barely audible. forgive me, my boy, for not protecting you, for not seeing, for bringing that woman into our lives." I saw the tears run down his cheeks, and I felt my own heart break clean in two. This was the true cost. Not the ruined wedding, not the public scandal. It was the sight of my son, a good man, brought to his knees by his own guilt, and a betrayal so profound it would leave a scar for life. I moved to him. I placed my hands on his shaking shoulders, feeling the tremors of his grief. I helped him to his feet. "Look at me, Alex," I said, my voice grave but soft. He lifted his tear-streaked face to mine. "Luckily," I whispered, holding his gaze, "we stopped it in time." I looked around the ruined celebration, at the half-empty glasses, the uneaten food, the stunned and sorrowful faces of our family. "This false happiness," I said, "for him, for me, for everyone, ends here, and it ends now." The ballroom was a ghost ship, adrift in a sea of silence after the storm. The vibrant music, the joyful laughter, the clinking glasses, all of it was gone, replaced by the hushed, awkward murmurs of guests gathering their things and filing out, offering us sympathetic pats on the shoulder or avoiding our eyes altogether. The air, once fragrant with roses and celebration, now smelled of disappointment and shock. We stood there, the four of us, as the hotel staff began the somber task of clearing away the ruins of the feast that never was. Alex was a shell. He had stopped crying, but the tears had carved tracks through the mask of happiness he'd worn all day, revealing the raw, broken man beneath. He wouldn't let go of Leo's hand, his grip tight, almost desperate, as if afraid his son would vanish if he loosened it for even a second. Lucy was our anchor. While Alex and I were lost in our own storms of emotion, she was the one thinking practically. She gathered our coats, spoke softly to the event coordinator, her arm a constant, steadying presence around Leo's small shoulders. Her gaze kept drifting to Alex, filled with a pain so deep it was a physical ache to witness. We didn't speak in the car. The drive home was a tunnel of quiet, broken only by the hum of the engine and the sound of Leo, exhausted from terror, finally falling into a fitful sleep in the back seat, his head in Lucy's lap. When we arrived at Alex's house, the house he was meant to share with Ava, the silence was even louder. It was a silence that seemed to mock the future that had been planned within these walls. Alex walked in first, his shoulders slumped, and went straight to the living room, sinking into his armchair as if the weight of the world had finally crushed him. I put Leo to bed, tucking the covers tightly around him, smoothing his hair back from his damp forehead. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Grandma?" he whispered, his voice thick with sleep and leftover fear. "Is the bad lady gone?" My heart shattered into a million new pieces. "Yes, my love," I whispered back, leaning down to kiss his cheek. "The bad lady is gone forever. You're safe now." He nodded, a tiny, weary motion, and closed his eyes, trusting my words completely. The faith of a child is a beautiful, terrifying thing. When I came back downstairs, Lucy was in the kitchen, mechanically making tea, the familiar, comforting ritual in the midst of such chaos. Alex hadn't moved. He was just staring into the empty fireplace, his face a blank canvas of devastation. I sat on the sofa opposite him, the silence stretching between us, taut and painful. The unspoken questions hung in the air. How did we not see? How did we let this happen? And in that heavy quiet, my mind, seeking escape from the present horror, drifted back. It didn't drift to the happy times, not at first. It was pulled, irresistibly, to the day the foundation of our family was first shattered. The day the real ghost, the one whose absence made room for a monster like Ava, came to live in this house. It was a Tuesday afternoon. An ordinary, sunny Tuesday. I was in my own kitchen, washing the lunch dishes, watching the sparrows dance in the birdbath outside the window. The phone rang. I wiped my hands on a towel, expecting it to be Alex, or maybe Maria, asking if I could pick up Leo from preschool. But it wasn't a familiar voice. It was cold, formal, detached. The voice of a stranger delivering a sentence. "Mrs. Williams, this is Officer Miller with the Phoenix Police Department. We regret to inform you that there has been an accident." I don't remember the rest of the sentence. I don't remember if he said her name. I just know that the world, the solid, dependable world I had known for 60 years, suddenly fell away beneath my feet. My hands began to shake so violently that the porcelain plate I was holding slipped from my grasp. It hit the terracotta tile floor with a sound that was both incredibly loud and impossibly distant, a sharp, final crack that seemed to symbolize everything. Maria. My Maria. Her car had been hit by a truck that lost control on the highway outside the city. She was gone. In an instant. Gone. I stood there, paralyzed, staring at the broken pieces of the plate on the floor. White shards on red tile. A mess that could be cleaned up, but the mess that had just been made of our lives, that was permanent. The funeral was held on a day of torrential rain, as if the sky itself could not contain its grief for her. The church was packed, a sea of black umbrellas and tear-streaked faces. Leo, only 4 years old, was in my arms, confused and overwhelmed by the somber adults and the relentless drumming of the rain on the roof. He kept twisting in my arms, looking around. "Grandma," he asked, in his small, piping voice, a sound that was brutally out of place. "Where is my mommy? Why is everyone so sad?" I held him tighter, swallowing the sob that threatened to tear me in two. "Your mommy is in a very beautiful place now, my love," I whispered into his soft hair, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. Inside, I was as shattered as that plate on my kitchen floor. And Alex, my strong, vibrant son. He stood by the coffin, his hand resting on the polished wood, his shoulders shaking with silent, ragged sobs. He couldn't speak. He couldn't even look at anyone. His gaze was empty, hollow, as if the best part of his soul had been ripped out and buried along with his wife. I knew he was trying to be strong for Leo, for me, but the man I saw that day was just a ghost. A walking wound. After that tragedy, the light went out of this house. Alex buried himself in work. He would leave before the sun was up and come home long after Leo was asleep. I understood. He was running. He was trying to outpace the grief, to fill the immense, Maria-shaped void in his heart with meetings and deadlines and the sterile glow of a computer screen. But Leo, my poor, sweet boy, suffered the most in the silence. The little boy who used to chatter nonstop about dinosaurs and dump trucks grew quiet. His eyes, so like his mother's, often held a deep, unchildlike sadness, as if he were perpetually waiting for a miracle that would never come for his mother to walk back through the door. I became his rock. I moved in for the first few months. I took him to school every morning. I sat by his bed every night, reading him stories until his breathing evened out into sleep. "Grandma," he would often ask, his voice small in the dark, "tell me a story about my mommy." And I would, my voice choked with tears. I refused to let him see. I told him about how Maria would sing a silly song about a runaway meatball to get him to eat his spaghetti. I told him how she would cut his apples into the shape of stars and rabbits. I told him about the way her laughter sounded, like wind chimes on a spring breeze. Each story was a desperate attempt to keep Maria's memory alive, not just in his mind, but in my own breaking heart. My memory snapped back to the present. I was still on the sofa, the untouched cup of tea Lucy had placed in my hands now cold. Alex was still in the chair, but he was no longer staring at the fireplace. He was looking at me, his eyes red-rimmed and full of the same ancient grief I had just been reliving. He had traveled back there, too. He had been remembering the same devastation. "I thought," he began, his voice rough, scraping out of his throat. "I thought I was finally moving on. I thought I was giving Leo a family again, a mother." He dropped his head into his hands. "Instead, I invited a wolf into our home and almost let her devour my son." The guilt in his voice was a tangible thing, a heavy cloak threatening to smother him. It was then that Lucy finally broke. She had been standing in the doorway, listening. She came into the room and knelt in front of Alex's chair, her own tears finally falling freely. "It's not your fault, Alex," she said, her voice fierce through her crying. "You wanted to be happy. You wanted Leo to be happy. She was a snake. She fooled all of us." And she had. But as I looked at Lucy, at the raw, honest love and pain on her face, I was struck by the cruel irony of it all. The true, steady, healing love had been here all along, right under our noses. It had been in the lunches she packed, the kites she flew, the nights she spent by a sick child's bed. While Ava had been a specter of false perfection, Lucy was the living, breathing antidote to our grief. And in the wreckage of this terrible day, as we sat surrounded by the ghost of one woman and the poisonous aftermath of another, I began to see the first, faint glimmer of a different future. A future not built on a dazzling, desperate performance, but on the quiet, resilient foundation of a love that had been there all along. The days following the wedding were a slow, painful awakening. The story, of course, had spread like wildfire through our small community. The phone rang incessantly, well-meaning friends, shocked relatives, even a local reporter sniffing for a scoop. Each ring was a fresh jab, a reminder of the public humiliation and the private, near-fatal betrayal. I eventually stopped answering, letting the machine capture the symphony of sympathy and morbid curiosity. Alex was a ghost in his own home. The confident man in the navy blue suit was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shell who moved through the rooms with a heavy, silent tread. He took Leo to and from school, his hand a constant, almost desperate clasp on his son's shoulder, as if making up for every second of inattention. The name Ava became a curse word never spoken, her presence scrubbed from the house with a fury that was almost violent. He had packed every trace of her, the gaudy perfume on the dresser, the silk robe in the bathroom, the few photos from their brief courtship into a single black trash bag that he threw into the dumpster with a final, gut-wrenching heave. I watched him with a heart so full of pain it felt like a physical weight. I didn't blame him. How could I? Love makes fools of the wisest of us, and grief makes us desperate for any port in a storm. I understood that his retreat into silence wasn't a rejection of us, but a deep, shame-filled mourning for the happiness he thought he had found, and the terrifying realization of how close he had come to losing everything that truly mattered. My role was the same as it had been since Maria left, caretaker. I cooked Leo's favorite foods, cheesy pasta with the crust just right, soft vanilla pudding swirled with raspberry jam. I tried to rebuild the walls of his small world, to make his home feel like a fortress again. But the truth was, the deepest cracks in his little soul weren't being mended by my cooking, they were being healed by Lucy. If I was the keeper of the house, Lucy was the keeper of the flame, the fragile, flickering flame of Leo's spirit. Her care was not a duty, it was a devotion. Every morning, she would arrive at the house before school, her arms laden with groceries she'd bought with her own waitress's tips. She would carefully prepare Leo's lunch, her brow furrowed in concentration. It wasn't just a sandwich and an apple. She would cut his turkey into fun shapes, include a small container of his favorite yogurt, and always, always, a little note. She'd write it on a colorful sticky note. For my brave Leo, have a great day, love, Aunt Lucy. And next to the words, she would draw a little smiling face, or a rocket ship, or a dinosaur, whatever he was obsessed with that week. I'll never forget the first time I saw him open his lunchbox after everything. His eyes, which had been so dull and fearful, lit up for a split second. "Aunt Lucy," he'd exclaimed, a faint echo of his old joy, "you draw the best dinosaurs." It was a small thing, a tiny, simple thing. But in that moment, it was everything. Every afternoon, like clockwork, she would take him to the park. I used to watch them from the living room window, a silent sentinel to their healing. She didn't just sit on a bench and watch him play. She was down in the dirt with him. She taught him how to fly a kite, showing him how to hold the string, how to run into the wind to give it life. I saw him fall once, tumbling off the bottom of the slide and scraping his knee. Before he could even draw a breath to cry, Lucy was there. She scooped him up, brushed the dust from his jeans, and held him close, whispering into his hair, "It's okay, my love. I'm here." "You're so brave." And his cry turned into a hiccup, and then, miraculously, into a clear, bright laugh that echoed across the playground. That sound, it was a balm, a healing melody I feared I would never hear again. One night, a few weeks after the wedding, Leo spiked a high fever. It was a chilling echo of that long-ago night with Maria, and a fresh wave of panic seized me. But this time, Lucy was there. She didn't ask if she should stay, she just did. She pulled a chair up next to his bed, a bowl of cool water, and a cloth beside her. I stood in the doorway, hidden by shadows, and watched. She didn't turn on the bright overhead light, just a small lamp that cast a soft, golden glow. She placed the damp cloth on his forehead with a touch so gentle it barely stirred the air. And then she began to tell him a story, not one from a book, but one she made up on the spot. A story about a little sparrow who was afraid of storms, but who learned to be brave by following the moon. Her voice was a low, steady murmur, a river of calm in the room's anxious energy. Leo's labored breathing began to even out as he listened, his eyes fixed on her face, trusting her completely. And then I saw him. Alex. He was standing at the other end of the hall, also watching. He must have heard the commotion and come from his room. He wasn't looking at Leo. He was looking at Lucy. The expression on his face, it wasn't just gratitude. It was a dawning, awe-struck realization. It was a complex tapestry of remorse and wonder, as if he were seeing her, truly seeing her for the very first time. He watched the way her hand soothed our son's brow, the way her voice weaved a safety net of stories, the way her very presence in the room seemed to push back the darkness. I didn't say a word, I didn't move. I just retreated silently into the deeper shadows of the hall, my own heart pounding with a fragile, hopeful ache. I gave them their space, this sacred, unspoken moment. But in my heart, a tiny, tenacious seed of hope began to sprout. In the wreckage of a love that was nothing but a beautiful, poisonous lie, I saw the possibility of a different kind of love. A love that didn't arrive in a dazzling dress with a perfect smile, but one that arrived in a simple beige dress with a lunchbox and a story. A love that wasn't about taking, but about giving. A love that had been patiently waiting in the wings all along, quietly tending to the embers of our family, ensuring the flame never went out. The ghost of Maria would always be with us, a beloved silhouette in our family portrait. The venom of Ava would leave a scar, a permanent warning. But watching Lucy that night, I began to believe, for the first time in a very long time, that a new chapter wasn't just a desperate wish. It was a quiet, determined promise, being whispered in the dark to a feverish child by the woman who had, without any of us realizing it, already become the heart of this home. The heavy fog of the post-wedding scandal began, ever so slowly, to lift. It didn't vanish, a stain, like that never fully disappears, but it lost its suffocating density. The phone calls dwindled to a trickle, then stopped. The world outside our little bubble moved on to newer, fresher dramas. Inside the house, we were left with the quiet, hard work of reconstruction. Leo was the barometer of our progress. The fearful shadow in his eyes receded, replaced by glimmers of his old, curious self. He started talking more at breakfast, telling us about the adventures of the class hamster or a new fact he'd learned about volcanoes. The red toy car was still his constant companion, but now it raced across the living room floor in pursuit of imagined villains rather than being pushed back and forth in a nervous trance. The credit for this transformation belonged to one person. Lucy's presence was no longer a helpful visit, it was a fundamental part of our daily rhythm. She didn't ask for a key to the house. Alex simply gave her one, pressing it into her hand one evening with a silent, meaningful look. She had her own mug that lived on the counter, her favorite brand of tea in the cupboard. She was woven into the fabric of our lives, the golden thread holding the frayed edges together. One evening, I decided to make my famous cheesy pasta, the one with the crispy, buttery, breadcrumb topping that Leo loved. It was a cool, peaceful night. The scent of garlic and baking cheese filled the house, a simple, wholesome aroma that felt like an exorcism of the last lingering ghosts of Ava's toxic, expensive perfumes. We all gathered around the kitchen table, a rare, complete gathering. Alex, Lucy, Leo, and me. For the first time in what felt like years, the air wasn't thick with unspoken grief or tense with hidden malice. It was just easy. Comfortable. Lucy was helping Leo twist the long strands of pasta onto his fork, laughing softly as he made a playful mess. Alex was pouring glasses of iced tea for everyone. A small, genuine smile playing on his lips as he watched them. I looked at this scene, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was it. This was the family I had fought for, prayed for, through all the darkness. It wasn't the picture-perfect family from a magazine. It was better, it was real. It was built on shared scars and a love that had been tested in fire and had not just survived, but had been tempered into something stronger. We were halfway through the meal, the conversation a gentle hum of simple things, plans for the weekend, Leo's upcoming school play, when Leo suddenly put his fork down. He looked up, his clear blue eyes, so like his mother's, moving from face to face before settling, with a child's unwavering certainty, on Lucy. The table grew quiet, sensing the shift in him. He took a small breath, his little chest puffing out, and said, in a voice that was soft but crystal clear, "I want Aunt Lucy to be my mommy." The words hung in the air, simple, profound, and utterly world-altering. Time stopped. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to cease. The entire universe narrowed to this kitchen table. Lucy, who had been taking a sip of water, froze. A deep, beautiful blush spread from her neck all the way to her cheeks. She slowly lowered her glass, her eyes wide and shimmering with unshed tears. She looked down at her plate, her fingers tightening around her fork as if it were the only thing tethering her to the earth. She was overwhelmed, humbled, speechless. Alex, sitting across from her, went completely still. His fork clattered softly against his plate. His gaze was locked on Leo, then slowly, so slowly, traveled to Lucy. The look on his face was one of pure, unadulterated shock, as if his son had just spoken a truth so fundamental it had shaken the very foundations of his understanding. His eyes, which had been so full of guilt and shadows, now glistened with a sheen of tears, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of revelation. I felt my own breath catch. I looked at my grandson, this small, brave boy who had endured more than any child should, and I saw the pure, uncomplicated wisdom that only the very young possess. He wasn't asking for a replacement. He was naming what already was. He was claiming the love that had saved him. The silence stretched, threatening to become awkward, but it wasn't. It was sacred. I reached out and placed my hand on Alex's arm, pulling his gaze toward me. He looked at me, his eyes full of a storm of emotion, confusion, hope, a dawning, terrifying possibility. I gave him a small, knowing smile, my own vision blurring with happy tears. "True happiness, son," I said, my voice warm and thick with emotion, "doesn't come from a dazzling wedding dress." I paused, letting my gaze drift to Lucy, who finally dared to look up. Her beautiful, honest face a mirror of vulnerable hope. It comes from a sincere heart that knows how to love. My words were the permission he didn't know he needed. I saw the storm in his eyes clear, replaced by a calm, certain light. The spark of hope I had seen in the hallway weeks ago now ignited into a steady flame. He didn't say anything to Lucy then. He didn't have to. The look that passed between them in that silent kitchen was more powerful than any vow spoken in a cathedral. It was a conversation of years, of shared grief and quiet support, of missed chances and a second chance, all happening in a single, breathless moment. Leo, satisfied that he had stated his simple, profound truth, picked up his fork and went back to his pasta as if he had just commented on the weather. The spell was broken, but the world had been remade. We finished our meal, the conversation starting up again, softer now, laced with a new, unspoken understanding. The air was electric with possibility. After dinner, Lucy put Leo to bed while Alex and I cleaned the kitchen. He was quiet, thoughtful, moving with a new sense of purpose. "He's right, you know," I said softly, handing him a rinsed plate to dry. He took it, his hand steady. He didn't look at me, but he nodded, a slow, definitive motion. "I know, Mom," he whispered. I think I've known for a long time. I was just too blind, too lost, to see it." "It's not too late," I said. He finally looked at me, and the ghost of a true, unburdened smile touched his lips. "No," he agreed. "It's not." Later, after Lucy had gone home and the house was quiet, I sat by my window just as I had on so many other nights. But this time, the moon didn't feel like a cold, distant observer. It felt like a benevolent witness. Its soft, silver light streamed down, illuminating the kite that Lucy and Leo had flown the day before, its string still tangled in the branches of the oak tree. It was no longer a reminder of a happy moment past. It was a promise of more days in the sun, more laughter in the yard, more stories told in the dark. The old wounds would always be there, but they were no longer bleeding. They were scars, reminders of what we had survived. Leo's innocent declaration had been the key that unlocked a door we had all been too afraid to open. And on the other side, I could finally see it clearly, a future. Not a desperate attempt to recreate the past, but a brave, beautiful, chosen path forward. A family, not just by blood or by tragic circumstance, but by the most powerful force in the world, a love that chooses, again and again, to stay. A new, gentle energy settled over the house in the days that followed Leo's dinner table proclamation. It was as if his simple, profound words had given us all permission to exhale a breath we hadn't realized we were holding. The unspoken thing was now spoken. The love that had been a quiet, steady undercurrent was now a river flowing openly, changing the landscape of our lives. I saw the change most clearly in Alex. The guilt and heaviness that had cloaked him since the wedding began to dissolve, not all at once, but piece by piece, like the sun slowly burning off a morning fog. He started coming home from work on time, not buried in paperwork or lost in thought, but present. He'd walk through the door and his eyes would immediately seek out Lucy, a soft, genuine smile gracing his face, a smile I hadn't seen since before Maria died, one that reached his eyes and lit them from within. He started participating in the small, sacred rituals Lucy had established. He'd help pack Leo's lunch, his large, clumsy hands carefully trying to mimic the way she cut his sandwiches into stars. He started joining them on their trips to the park, no longer a distant observer but an active player in their games of tag, his laughter, deep and real, mingling with Leo's squeals of delight and Lucy's musical chuckle. One Saturday morning, I was in the kitchen, watching them through the window. Lucy was teaching Leo how to plant sunflower seeds in a small patch of dirt by the fence. Alex was kneeling beside them, his sleeves rolled up, his hands covered in soil as he helped Leo press a seed into the earth. Lucy leaned over to show him something, her hair brushing his shoulder, and he looked up at her with such naked, unguarded affection that it made my heart ache with joy. It wasn't the frantic, desperate passion he'd had with Ava. This was slower, deeper, rooted in shared ground. That was the moment I knew he was finally, truly healing. He was no longer just Leo's father, or Maria's widower, or Ava's betrayed groom. He was becoming himself again, a man rediscovering the simple, profound joy of building a life, seed by seed, moment by moment, with someone who saw all his broken pieces and loved him not in spite of them, but because of them. A few evenings later, the three of us were in the living room after putting Leo to bed. Lucy was curled up in the corner of the sofa, sketching in a notepad a picture of a sunflower for Leo. Alex was in his armchair, watching her, a quiet intensity in his gaze. The comfortable silence was broken when he suddenly stood up. He walked over to the sofa and knelt on the floor in front of Lucy, just as he had knelt before Leo in the ballroom. But this time, there was no guilt, no despair. There was only a quiet, unwavering certainty. Lucy looked up from her sketch, her pencil stilling, her eyes wide and questioning. "Lucy," he began, his voice low and tender, but firm with conviction. "I know I made a mistake, a terrible, nearly catastrophic mistake. I was blind. I was so desperate to fill a hole that I let a stranger into our lives, and I put my son in danger." He reached out and took her free hand, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. Lucy's breath hitched, but she didn't pull away. She just watched him, her entire being focused on his words. "But this time," he continued, his voice gaining strength, "I don't want to let go of the person who has truly been by our family's side. The person who held us together when we were falling apart. The person who taught my son how to laugh again." He paused, his eyes glistening. "The person I should have seen all along." Lucy's lower lip trembled. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. "You are the most beautiful, kind, and strong person I have ever known," Alex whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You are the heart of this family. You have been for a long, long time. I love you, Lucy. I think a part of me always has." He didn't have a ring. He didn't need one. The proposal wasn't about a question. It was about a statement of fact, a claiming of a truth that had been waiting for its moment to bloom. "I don't want to rush you," he said softly. "I don't want a big wedding. I just want you and Leo and this." He gestured around the room, at the comfortable, lived-in space that felt like a home again. "I want to build a real life with you. Will you, will you let me? Will you be my wife?" Lucy was crying openly now, silent, happy tears streaming down her face. She looked from his earnest, hopeful face to me. I gave her a teary, encouraging nod, my own heart so full I could barely breathe. She turned back to Alex, a radiant, breathtaking smile breaking through her tears, a smile that held all the love and patience and quiet strength she had carried for so long. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked but clear. "Yes, Alex. Of course, I will." She slid off the sofa and into his arms, and he held her there, kneeling on the floor, their bodies shaking with the force of their emotion, relief, joy, and the profound peace of finally coming home. I watched them, the tears now flowing freely down my own cheeks. This was not a whirlwind romance built on sand. This was a fortress being built on a foundation of shared grief, mutual respect, and a love that had been tested and proven unbreakable. It was the happy ending we had all stopped daring to hope for. The wedding, when it happened a few months later, was nothing like the opulent, performative spectacle of his marriage to Ava. It was held in our backyard, under the very oak tree where Leo's kite was still tangled. The sunflowers they had planted together were tall and brilliant, turning their faces toward the Sunday. The guests were only our closest family and friends, the ones who had stood by us through everything. Lucy wore a simple, cream-colored sundress, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers picked from the garden. Leo was the ring-bearer, his small chest puffed out with importance, carefully carrying the two simple gold bands on a small velvet pillow. When Alex saw Lucy walking toward him, his face held a look of such pure, unadulterated joy that it eclipsed any happiness I had ever seen on him before. He took her hands, and they exchanged vows they had written themselves, vows not of perfection, but of promise. A promise to always see each other, a promise to always protect their family, a promise to choose each other every single day. As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Alex leaned in and kissed Lucy, a kiss that was both tender and full of a passionate, enduring promise. The small crowd erupted in cheers and applause, but the loudest sound was Leo's joyful shout as he launched himself at their legs, wrapping them both in a triumphant hug. I stood to the side, my hand over my heart, watching my family, my whole, complete, beautifully scarred, and fiercely loved family. The journey had been long and paved with heartbreak, but it had led us here, to this sun-drenched backyard, to this moment of perfect, hard-won happiness. The past was not forgotten. Maria's memory was a gentle presence in the dappled sunlight, her love forever a part of the foundation. The nightmare with Ava was a shadow that had finally been chased away by the light. And Lucy? Lucy was the sunrise after a long, dark night. She was the fresh beginning we had all so desperately needed. As I looked at my son, finally at peace, at my grandson, radiant with joy, and at my new daughter, the woman who had saved us all with the sheer force of her love, I knew one thing for certain. Our story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about redemption. And it was only just beginning. The soft click of the camera turning off was the only sound that marked the end of my confession. The story was out. It existed now, not just as a painful memory in my heart, but as a digital echo sent out into the vast, humming universe of the internet. I sat for a long time in the ensuing silence, the plush armchair holding me like a gentle embrace. The ghosts that had haunted this room, the ghost of Maria's laughter, the ghost of Ava's deception, felt quieter now, as if by speaking their names, I had given them a place to rest. My gaze drifted around the room, landing on the physical artifacts of our new life. A framed photo on the mantelpiece showed Alex, Lucy, and Leo, their faces smeared with chocolate cake, taken just a week ago. It wasn't a professionally shot portrait, it was alive, messy, and real. Next to it sat a lumpy clay pot Leo had made in art class. A home for the worms, he declared. And on the bookshelf, nestled between novels, was Lucy's simple cream-colored sundress from their backyard wedding, carefully preserved like a sacred relic. This was no longer the house that grief built. It was the home that love rebuilt. A soft knock at the front door pulled me from my thoughts. Before I could even rise, I heard it open, the familiar, welcome sound of a key turning in the lock. "Grandma? We're home." Leo's voice, bright and clear as a bell, echoed through the hallway. A moment later, he burst into the living room, his cheeks flushed from the outdoors, a dandelion puff clenched in his fist. "Look, I brought you a wishing flower," he announced, scrambling onto my lap without ceremony. He was getting too big for this, but neither of us would ever admit it. Behind him, Alex and Lucy entered, their hands linked. They carried the quiet, comfortable air of two people who are exactly where they are meant to be. Lucy held a paper bag from the local bakery, the scent of fresh, warm bread, filling the room. "We brought dinner," Alex said, his voice warm. He looked at me, at the camera on its tripod, and his eyes held a question. "Did you finish it?" I nodded, stroking Leo's hair as he carefully presented his dandelion to me. "I did." "All of it?" Lucy asked softly, her gaze knowing and gentle. "All of it," I confirmed. "The beginning, the middle, and our beautiful, messy, wonderful now." We moved to the kitchen, the heart of the home. As Lucy unpacked the food and Alex poured glasses of water, the scene was a living testament to everything I had just recounted on camera. This was the peace we had fought for. This simple, unremarkable moment was our greatest victory. Later, after a dinner filled with easy conversation and Leo's elaborate retelling of his day at the park, after he was tucked into bed with a story from Lucy and a goodnight kiss from his father, the three of us, adults, found ourselves back in the living room. The darkness outside the window was now complete, the world reduced to the warm, lamplit island of our home. "I've been thinking," Alex began, his voice thoughtful. He was looking at Lucy, his love for her a quiet, steady flame in his eyes. "About what you said, Mom, about family being a choice." He reached for Lucy's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "We want to make it official," he said, turning his gaze to me. "Not just for us, for Leo. We've started the process for Lucy to legally adopt him." The air left my lungs in a soft, happy rush. It was the final perfect stitch, closing the last open wound. It wasn't about replacing Maria, it was about cementing the truth that had already taken root in our lives. Lucy was his mother in every way that mattered, and soon she would be in the eyes of the law, too. Tears of pure, unadulterated joy welled in my eyes. "Oh, my dears," I whispered, my voice choked. That is everything." Lucy was crying too, silent, happy tears. "He's my son," she said simply, and in those 3 words was a universe of love, sacrifice, and fierce, protective devotion. In that moment, I understood the final, missing piece of my story, the one I would have added if the camera was still rolling. I looked at both of them, my heart so full it felt like a supernova. "You have to promise me something," I said, my voice gaining a new strength. "Promise me you'll never forget this feeling. This feeling of choosing each other every single day. The world will try to sell you a story of perfect, easy love, but the greatest love, the love that lasts, is the one you build. It's the one you choose to repair when it cracks. It's the one you protect with everything you have." I thought of the viewers who might be listening to my story, of the silent struggles in their own homes. "And if you ever see a shadow falling over someone you love," I continued, my gaze intense, "if you ever feel that cold trickle of fear in your own heart, promise me you will not stay silent. You will be the voice for the voiceless. You will be the courage for the fearful. You will look under the table." Alex and Lucy both nodded, their faces serious, understanding the weight of the promise they were making. "We promise, Mom," Alex said, his voice thick with emotion. "We promise." Satisfied, I leaned back in my chair. The story was truly complete now. It had a beginning, a middle, and an ending that was, in fact, a glorious new beginning. It was a story of loss, yes, of betrayal, absolutely, but more than anything, it was a story of a love that was chosen, built, and fiercely protected. The echo of my story was now out in the world, a message in a bottle tossed into a digital sea. But here, in this quiet, lamplit room, surrounded by the living, breathing proof of its happy ending, I felt a profound sense of peace. The revenge was not in the exposure, or the public shaming, or the ruined wedding. The true revenge was this quiet kitchen, this linked hands, this chosen family, thriving in the light, a beautiful, resilient garden growing from the ashes of the past. And as I looked at my son and the woman who had become his true wife, at the grandson sleeping safely upstairs, I knew with absolute certainty that we had won. We had not just survived the storm, we had learned to dance in the rain. And our song, finally, was one of joy. Time, which had once felt like a heavy, grief-laden chain, now moved with the gentle, predictable rhythm of the seasons. Another year had turned, and the scars of the past had softened, not into oblivion, but into a part of our landscape, like the gnarled roots of an old, strong tree that had weathered a great storm. I stood at the edge of our backyard, a cup of warm tea in my hands, watching the scene before me. It was Leo's 8th birthday. The backyard was no longer just a yard. It was a kingdom of his childhood, a testament to our collective healing. The sunflowers he and Lucy had planted were a towering wall of gold, their heavy heads nodding in the breeze. And yes, the red kite was still there, its string now hopelessly woven into the oak's branches, a permanent, beloved fixture we had all come to cherish. The party was in full swing. Children's laughter echoed as they chased bubbles blown by Lucy. Alex was manning the grill, flipping burgers with a look of deep domestic contentment, joking with my brother, Uncle Ben. The air was rich with the scent of charcoal and cut grass, of chocolate cake and simple, human joy. This was the picture I held in my heart. This was the revenge, not a moment of confrontation, but a lifetime of mornings and afternoons, and evenings just like this one, filled with a peace we had clawed back from the jaws of tragedy. Lucy, seeing me standing alone, broke away from the children and came to my side. She slipped her arm through mine, her head naturally leaning against my shoulder. She didn't say anything. She just watched the celebration with me, her presence a silent poem of gratitude and shared victory. "He's happy," she said after a long, comfortable silence. "He is," I agreed, squeezing her arm. "They both are, because of you." She shook her head, a humble tear glistening in the corner of her eye. "No, Betty, because of us. Because this family decided to fight for each other." She was right. It was never one person. It was the collective choice to not let the darkness win. My decision to look under the table, Lucy's courage to stand and speak the truth, Alex's painful, necessary awakening. Even little Leo's terrified whisper was an act of bravery that set the entire chain of events in motion. Later, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet, the party wound down. The children, tired and sticky with cake, were collected by their parents. The backyard was a happy mess of abandoned paper plates and forgotten toys. The four of us, Alex, Lucy, Leo, and I stayed outside, wrapped in the quiet of the evening. Leo, exhausted but radiant, was curled up on a lounge chair, his head in Lucy's lap, already half asleep. Alex sat on the grass at their feet, his hand resting on Lucy's knee. I looked at them, this perfect, imperfect triangle of love, and I knew my work was done. The fortress was built. It was strong. It would endure. "Grandma?" Leo's sleepy voice pierced the quiet. "Yes, my love? Is this what forever feels like?" The question was so profound, so innocent, it stole the air from my lungs. Alex and Lucy looked at me, their eyes also holding the question. I thought of Maria, her memory a sweet, sad smile in my heart. I thought of the long, empty nights after she was gone. I thought of the chilling fear of the wedding day, the crumpled note, the shattered glass of a false future. And then I looked at the three of them, here, now, whole. "Yes, my darling," I said, my voice thick with a love so vast it felt eternal. "This is what forever feels like. It's not a promise that nothing bad will ever happen. It's the promise that no matter what happens, we will face it together. Just like this." Leo smiled, a contented, sleepy smile, and closed his eyes, secure in the truth of my words. Alex reached up and took my hand. "We did it, Mom," he whispered, his voice full of awe. "We actually made it." "You did," I said, my own tears finally falling, not from sorrow but from a profound, overflowing gratitude. "You built a beautiful life from the broken pieces. You chose love. And that, my son, is the greatest victory of all." As the first stars pricked the darkening canvas of the sky, I knew this was the final chapter. Not just of the story I told to the camera, but of the long, painful season of our lives. The story of revenge was a misnomer. This was never about vengeance, it was about resilience. It was about the quiet power of a love that shows up with a lunchbox and a story. It was about the courage to trust a child's whisper. It was about the strength to rebuild, not on a foundation of sand, but on the unshakable bedrock of truth and chosen devotion. The video I made would live on, a digital testament to our journey. I hoped it would be a candle for others, as I had said. But here, in the tangible world, our testimony was this backyard, this sleeping child, these linked hands. The garden we had tended with our tears and our courage was now in full, glorious bloom. And as I sat with my family in the gathering dusk, I knew, with a peace that passed all understanding, that our story, the real, true, beautiful story, was only just beginning its long, happy, and peaceful forever. There is a particular quality to the light in late afternoon, a golden, honeyed glow that seems to forgive the world all its transgressions. It streamed through the kitchen window now, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, celebratory sparks. I stood at the sink, my hands submerged in warm, soapy water, washing the lunch dishes. It was a mundane task, one I had performed thousands of times in my life, but today it felt like a sacrament. This simple act of caring for my family, in this kitchen, in this home that had been a fortress, a battlefield, and was now a sanctuary, felt like the most profound prayer of gratitude I could offer. From the living room, I could hear the sounds of my life's greatest victory. Leo's voice, clear and confident now, not a terrified whisper, was explaining the intricate rules of a board game to Lucy. Her responses were patient, laced with the warm amusement that seemed to be her permanent state these days. And Alex's deeper rumble, not the hollow sound of a man going through the motions, but a vibrant, engaged tone as he debated a move. This was the symphony I had almost lost. This was the music I now measured my life by. My mind drifted back not to the sharp, painful memories of the wedding, but further, to the very soil from which this current happiness had grown. It was impossible to think of our resilience without acknowledging what had come before, the deep roots of love that had allowed us to eventually bloom again. I remembered a spring afternoon, years before Maria was taken from us. Leo was just a toddler, an unsteady whirlwind on fat, determined legs. We were all in this very backyard, a different version of it. Then, Alex was trying to assemble a bright red swing set, his brow furrowed in concentration, muttering at the incomprehensible instructions. Maria was on a blanket, not watching Alex struggle, but watching Leo. Her gaze was a physical thing, a soft, warm blanket of adoration wrapped around our grandson as he chased a bumblebee with single-minded fascination. I had brought out a pitcher of lemonade, the ice cubes clinking a cheerful tune. "How's the engineering coming along, son?" I'd asked, setting the tray down on the patio table. Alex had looked up, a smudge of grease on his cheek, and grinned that easy, unburdened grin he had back then. "I think the instructions were translated through 3 different languages by someone who's never actually seen a swing, Mom. But we'll get there." Maria had laughed, a sound like clear water over smooth stones. "He's been saying that for 2 hours, Betty. I think Leo's going to be off to college before this swing set is safe to use." I poured the lemonade and sat beside her, our shoulders touching. We didn't speak for a long while, just watched our boys, the big one and the little one, navigate their separate challenges. The air was sweet with the scent of cut grass and the lilacs blooming by the fence. "He's so lucky," Maria had said softly, her eyes still on Leo, "to have this. To have a grandma who brings lemonade, a dad who will spend his entire Saturday wrestling with a metal monster for him, a yard to run in." She'd leaned her head against my shoulder, a gesture of such natural affection, it had brought sudden, happy tears to my eyes. This is what a childhood should be, safe and full of love. That moment, that simple, sun-drenched afternoon, was a seed. It was a deposit in the bank of our family's soul. The love that was present in that yard, the safety Maria spoke of, the simple, unwavering commitment to one another that was the capital we would desperately draw upon in the years to come. When the storm hit and washed nearly everything away, that deep-rooted knowledge of what love was supposed to feel like was what remained. It was the standard against which we measured everything that came after. It was why Ava's performance, for all its dazzling perfection, never truly felt like home. The blueprint of real love was already etched on our hearts, and her imitation was a poor forgery. The memory faded, leaving the warm reality of the present. I finished the last dish, wiping my hands on a towel. I walked into the living room. The board game was in a state of happy chaos. Leo was on his knees, pointing triumphantly at the board. "See, I told you. That's a triple-word score." Lucy was laughing, her head thrown back. "You are a ruthless Scrabble champion, Leo Williams. Ruthless." Alex caught my eye from his spot on the floor. He smiled, and in that smile, I saw the ghost of the young man from the backyard, but layered with the hard-won wisdom of the man he had become. He saw me remembering. He always knew. Later that evening, after Leo was in bed, the 3 of us sat on the back porch, wrapped in the cool embrace of the night. The fairy lights Lucy had strung up for their wedding glowed softly, illuminating the faces of the sunflowers, their heads now heavy with seeds. "I was thinking today," I said, my voice quiet in the stillness, "about Maria." I felt rather than saw Alex tense beside me. Speaking her name had once been like touching a fresh wound. Now, it was like touching a cherished, weathered stone, smooth with time, solid with memory. "I was thinking about that day with the swing set," I continued. "And the lemonade." A soft, wistful sigh escaped Alex. "I never did get that bolt tightened properly. It always squeaked." He was silent for a moment. "She loved that squeak. Said it was the swing set's song." Lucy reached over and took his hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her presence in these moments was never an intrusion. It was a bridge, connecting the past to the present, allowing Alex to visit his memories without getting lost in them. "That day," I said, "Maria told me that Leo was lucky to have this safety. this love. She was right. And that's what she gave him. That's what she gave all of us. That foundation. I looked at both of them, their faces illuminated by the soft, golden lights. When everything fell apart, we almost forgot what it felt like. We were so desperate to feel safe again that we were willing to accept a cheap imitation, but the blueprint was always there, inside us. We just had to remember how to read it. Lucy's eyes glistened in the dim light. She must have been an incredible woman. She was, Alex said, his voice thick but steady. And she would have loved you, Lucy. She would have loved you for loving Leo. She would have been so grateful that he has you. It was the final piece of healing, that acknowledgement. It wasn't about replacing, it was about integrating. It was understanding that the heart has an infinite capacity for love, and that honoring one love did not diminish another. Lucy's love had not erased Maria's, it had built upon its foundation, creating a new, stronger structure that could shelter all of us. The soil of this house is rich, I murmured, more to myself than to them. It's been fed with love and with tears. And my God, look what's grown from it. We sat in a comfortable silence after that, listening to the crickets and the distant hum of the city. The past was not a ghost, to be feared, but an ancestor to be honored. The present was not a consolation prize, but a miracle to be cherished. And the future, for the first time in a very, very long time, was not a terrifying question mark, but a gentle, open road waiting for us to walk it together. The story of the note, the wedding, the confrontation, it was a dramatic, fiery chapter. But this, here, was the true story. The quiet, ongoing story of a family remembering who they were and choosing every single day to build something beautiful from the pieces, guided by the unbreakable blueprints of a love that death itself could not erase. The turning of the year became a tangible thing in our home, marked not by dates on a calendar, but by the quiet accumulation of joy. It was in the way Leo's height was notched onto the kitchen doorframe, each line a testament to a year of safety and growth. It was in the way Alex's briefcase, once a symbol of his escape, now sat by the door, forgotten until morning, because his evenings were too full of life to be spent working. It was in the way Lucy's simple sundress from her wedding was no longer a relic on a shelf, but a comfortable, oft-worn garment, its fabric softened by countless washes and days spent living in it. One Saturday, we undertook a project that felt more significant than any of us initially let on. The red kite, Leo's brave little flag that had flown from the oak tree for over a year, was finally coming down. The string was hopelessly entangled, woven into the branches by wind and time, a physical manifestation of how deeply that symbol of courage had rooted itself in our lives. We gathered in the backyard, Alex with a tall ladder, Lucy holding it steady, Leo directing operations with the solemn authority of a field marshal, and me, watching from my porch chair, my heart in my throat. "A little to the left, Dad," Leo called up, his face tilted to the sky. "You've almost got it." Alex, perched precariously, carefully worked at the knot of string and branches. It wasn't a quick process. It required patience, gentle tugs, and a respect for the tree that had held our talisman for so long. As I watched him, I saw not a man performing a chore, but a father carefully disentangling the past, not to discard it, but to bring it back to earth, to hold it in his hands and acknowledge its weight. Finally, with a soft snap, the string came free. Alex carefully gathered the kite, its red fabric faded to a soft rose and torn in one corner. He descended the ladder and presented it to Leo. Leo took it with a reverence that belied his age. He didn't whoop with joy or immediately run to fly it again. He held it, his small fingers tracing the tear, the frayed edges of the string. "It's a bit broken," he said, his voice thoughtful. "It's been through a lot," Lucy said softly, kneeling beside him. just like us. But look, the frame is still strong." He looked from the kite in his hands to Lucy's face, and a profound understanding seemed to pass between them. "We can fix it," he declared, his voice firm. "We can mend the tear. And it'll fly again. It'll be even stronger where it was broken." The metaphor was so perfect, so unforced, that it stole my breath. Alex's eyes met mine over Leo's head, and I saw the same awe reflected in them. Our boy wasn't just talking about a kite. And so, that afternoon became a mending. We didn't go to the park. We stayed right there at the kitchen table. Lucy found a needle and some sturdy red thread. Leo held the torn edges together with surprising dexterity while she stitched, her movements sure and careful. Alex reinforced the wooden frame where it had grown weak. I prepared a late lunch, the sounds of their quiet collaboration, a sweeter music than any symphony. They were not just repairing a toy. They were enacting a ritual. They were acknowledging the scars, not hiding them, and asserting that what was broken could be made whole again, its history of damage becoming part of its new strength. When the last stitch was tied off, Leo held up the kite. The tear was now a neat, red seam across its belly, a visible record of its survival. "It's beautiful," he whispered. It was. It was more beautiful than it had ever been when it was new. The following weekend, we took the mended kite to the park. The wind was perfect, a steady, gentle breeze. Leo held the string, Lucy's hands guiding his. With a running start and a whoop of pure, unadulterated joy, he launched it. The kite caught the wind, lifting, straining, climbing high into the vast, blue sky. The red seam was visible, a tiny, brave line against the expanse. It didn't falter. It flew truer and stronger than ever before. Alex stood beside me, his arm around my shoulders. We watched our son and the woman who was his mother in every way that mattered. Their faces turned to the sky, their laughter carried away on the wind. "He's right," Alex said, his voice thick with emotion. "It is more beautiful." This was the harvest. This was what we had been tending to through the long winter of our grief. It wasn't a single, dramatic moment of victory, but this quiet, continuous gathering of joy. The harvest was Leo's confident stance. It was the ease with which Alex now spoke of Maria, her memory a sweet companion, not a haunting ghost. It was the legal adoption papers that now resided in a filing cabinet, a formality that simply made official the truth we all lived every day. It was the mended kite, flying high, a testament to the fact that our family was not defined by the breaks, but by the exquisite art of our repair. That night, as I prepared for bed, I paused by Leo's door. He was asleep, the mended kite propped up in a place of honor on his bookshelf, next to the photo of him with Alex and Lucy. The red toy car was on the floor, no longer a desperate refuge, but just another toy in a happy child's room. I thought of the journey, the devastating phone call, the rain-soaked funeral, the hollow years, the terrifying discovery at the wedding, the searing confrontation. Each moment had felt like an ending. But they weren't. They were all turns in the road, leading us here, to this profound, ordinary, miraculous peace. The story I had told to the camera was complete. But our story, the true one, was this quiet, ongoing narrative of healing. It was the story of a love that had been tested in the hottest fire and had emerged not just intact, but refined, strengthened. It was the story of a family that had learned that its greatest power was not in avoiding the storm, but in learning to dance, together, in the rain, holding up their mended kite to the clearing sky. The revenge was never the point. The point was the redemption. The point was the harvest. And my God, what a beautiful, bountiful harvest it was. The final edit of the video was complete. I had told our story, from the first whispered fear to the mended kite flying in a clear blue sky. Sitting back in my chair, I felt not the weight of the past, but the profound lightness of release. It was out there now, a story among millions, and its fate was no longer mine to control. All that was left was the life we were living, the quiet, sturdy reality we had built with our own hands and hearts. A soft rain began to fall, tapping a gentle rhythm against the window pane. It was the kind of rain that washes the world clean, not the torrential downpour that had accompanied Maria's funeral. This was a rain of renewal. I watched the droplets trace paths down the glass, each one reflecting the warm lamplight from inside, and I thought about legacy. Not the kind measured in money or property, but the legacy of memory, of lessons learned in the hardest ways possible. The front door opened and closed, followed by the familiar sounds of my family returning home. Leo's excited chatter filled the hallway, detailing some triumph from his playdate. Lucy's calm voice soothed his exuberance, reminding him to take off his muddy shoes. Alex's deeper tone joined the chorus, asking about the score of the game. This daily symphony was the true epilogue to my story, a living, breathing document that was written anew each day. They found me in the study. Leo rushed in first, his face alight, holding a slightly crumpled drawing. "Grandma, look! We made these at Jake's house. It's our family." I took the paper. It was a classic child's drawing: a lopsided house, a smiling sun, and 4 stick figures holding hands. But the details made my breath catch. There was a tall figure with a briefcase, Alex, a medium figure with a triangle dress, Lucy, a small figure with a red scribble in his hand, Leo and his 9 car, and a smaller figure with gray scribbles for hair, me. But above them, in the corner of the sky, was another, fainter stick figure, drawn with a yellow crayon, with a smiley face. Leo had drawn Maria in the Sunday sea. Leo said, pointing. "That's all of us. Even Mom is watching from heaven. She's in the sun, so she's always warm, and she can see everything." I looked from the drawing to his earnest, clear eyes. There was no sadness in them, only a simple, matter-of-fact love. He had integrated the past into his present in a way we adults struggled with for years. For him, Maria wasn't a ghost of loss. She was a permanent, warm presence in his sky. Lucy came up behind him, her hand resting on his shoulder. She saw the drawing and her eyes softened. "He did that all on his own," she whispered to me. "He asked for the yellow crayon and said he needed to put her in the Sunday." Alex stood in the doorway, watching us, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he walked in and crouched down next to Leo. "That's a beautiful picture, son. The most beautiful one I've ever seen." In that moment, the last vestige of tension I didn't even know I was carrying dissolved. The fear that Lucy might feel threatened by Maria's memory, or that Alex's love was a finite resource being divided, evaporated. Love wasn't a pie. It was a sundae, and its light could touch everyone without being diminished. Later that night, after the drawing was proudly taped to the refrigerator and Leo was sound asleep, the 3 of us sat in the living room. The rain had softened to a whisper outside. The video file sat on a thumb drive on the coffee table, a small, dark object containing our entire storm. "It's done," I said, nodding toward it. "Are you going to post it?" Alex asked, his voice neutral. "I think I have to," I replied. "Not for us. Not for revenge. But because when I was sitting at that wedding table, feeling that cold dread, I felt so alone. If hearing our story gives one other person the courage to listen to their fear, to look under their own table, then it's worth it." Lucy reached over and took my hand. "You were never alone, Betty. You had us, you just didn't know it yet." "I know that now," I said, squeezing her hand. "But the person in that moment doesn't know it. They just feel the ice in their veins and the weight of the world on their chest. I want to speak to that person." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain and the crackle of the fire Alex had lit in the fireplace. "You know," Alex began, staring into the flames, "I've been thinking about what Leo said. About Maria being in the Sunday." He looked at Lucy, then at me. "For the longest time, I thought moving on meant building a new house on a different plot of land. But that's not what we did. We stayed. We repaired this house. We fortified it. We didn't tear down the old rooms. We opened new windows in them." He took Lucy's other hand. "And you didn't ask us to forget the old garden. You just helped us plant new flowers in it. You made the whole thing bloom again." His words painted the truest picture of our journey. We hadn't erased the past. We had integrated it. We had learned to live with the ghosts, not as specters of sorrow, but as guardians of the love that had shaped us. Ava's toxicity was the only thing that had been truly excised, a cancerous growth removed to save the whole organism. The next morning, I uploaded the video. I wrote a simple description. "This is a story about a whisper, a note, and the courage to look under the table. It's a story about my family." I clicked publish and felt a chapter of my own soul settle into place. The responses began to trickle in, then flood. Comments from mothers, grandfathers, sisters, all sharing their own stories of intuition, of fear, of quiet betrayals and brave confrontations. They weren't commenting on our story so much as they were recognizing themselves in it. Our specific nightmare had become a universal parable about trusting your gut and protecting your loved ones. But the most profound moment came a week later. I was in the grocery store, pushing my cart through the cereal aisle, when a woman approached me. She was young, with tired eyes and a baby in a sling against her chest. "Excuse me," she said, her voice hesitant. Are you Betty? From the video?" I nodded, a little wary. Tears welled in her eyes. "I watched your story last night," she whispered, looking around to ensure we were alone. "My husband, he's so charming. Everyone loves him. But at home, the way he looks at our baby sometimes, it's not right. I've been telling myself I'm crazy, that I'm hormonal." She swallowed hard. "But after hearing you, I called my sister this morning. I'm taking the baby and we're going to stay with her." I looked under my table. "Thank you." She hurried away before I could respond, disappearing around a stack of canned goods. I stood there, my hand frozen on the cart handle, the mundane world of the grocery store shimmering with sudden, immense significance. That was it. That was the entire reason. That woman and her baby were the harvest of our pain. Our story had become a candle, just as I had hoped, and its light had just helped someone find their way out of a dark room. I finished my shopping in a daze, my heart full to bursting. When I arrived home, Lucy and Leo were in the kitchen, baking cookies. Flour dusted the counter and their faces. Leo was wielding a rolling pin with grave seriousness. "We're making sun cookies, Grandma," he announced, "with yellow sprinkles." I looked at Lucy, at the simple, beautiful normality of the scene, and then I thought of the woman in the grocery store, now on her way to safety. The two images fused together in my mind, the peaceful home we had fought for, and the other home our story had helped to protect. This was the final, complete picture. Our story was no longer just ours. It had gone out into the world and done its work. It had given us a peace we never thought possible, and it had offered a lifeline to a stranger. The circle was closed. The light we had kindled from our own darkest embers was now shining in other windows, pushing back other shadows. I walked into the kitchen, kissed my grandson's flowery head, and picked up a cookie cutter. The past was honored, the present was a gift, and the future, for our family and perhaps for others, was just a little bit brighter. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.